You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 54. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I am your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. We've decided not to have a sponsor for the podcast, but if you want to support the podcast and the kinds of things we do, feel free to visit my Pluralsight courses at seanw.me/psauthor, including my newest course on ASP.NET Best Practices on Entities, Validation, and View Models. On today's show, we have someone really exciting. Jeff Handley now works at Concur and is focusing on the UI for web applications. He previously worked at Microsoft as a development lead for NuGet and WCF RIA services. Jeff has been building and maturing software projects for 20 years. His largest projects have covered education, healthcare waste management, fantasy football, credit and mortgage, and point of sale. Throughout his career, he keeps on getting drawn back into web application development. I first ran into Jeff many years ago when I was deep into the Silverlight stack, and he was help leading the charge for RIA services. We didn't always agree on the direction of RIA services, I'll happily admit, but he always seemed to me as a really bright guy who was always willing to listen to good ideas. I was struck when we recorded today's show, Jeff's history matched my history. You'll get to hear how he started and get a glimpse into how I started. Let's take a listen to Jeff's story. Well, today's show, we're going to have on someone who I've worked with and talked with for a long time now, but I haven't gotten nearly enough time to spend hanging out with him, actually, is Jeff Handley. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Sean. I appreciate you having me here today.
Absolutely. And I knew you before the sort of NuGet days when you were working on, I'm trying to remember who you were working for back then, but I was in some of the insider programs and we interacted.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I would have been reporting to Tomek Jansuk at that time or maybe Jason Aller, but I think it was during like the Silverlight heyday and WCF RIA services.
It is. That's when I remember the whole RIA services wonderfulness or whatever the current thinking is.
It's kind of hard to believe that just a handful of years ago, we were all really excited about that
stuff. And we were wrong. But we won't talk about that. Otherwise, we'll get angry emails. Stop bringing it up. So I'm always curious about how people got started. I know that a lot of people started with like a first computer when they were a kid, had a little device that they played games on or got interested in programming. Was your story like that?
Not exactly. My first programming and just sort of interaction with a computer was back in 7th grade. So I was 12 years old. We didn't have a computer at home. I don't know that I'd ever actually worked with a computer at all. And my 7th grade class, we got the opportunity to take a programming class, and it was on Apples. I don't even know what model of an Apple it was, but we just did some basics. And I remember sort of the final project of that. We had to draw some sort of an animation, and I ended up, I guess I got done kind of early and I had a lot of extra time. So I went all out. So I ended up drawing this like ASCII art face that was like full screen, and it winked at you and it smiled at you. And then if you pressed a certain keystroke, like a little dribble of snot would fall out of its nose and it would lick it up and laugh at you.
Wow.
It was super awesome. I was really excited about it. And I did that, but then kind of a couple of years went by and I didn't get to touch a computer again, and I kind of forgot about it until later on in high school.
And what happened then?
Well, same kind of thing. There was a class offered. It was a computer literacy course, and we got to actually play Oregon Trail as part of the class and learn Lotus 1, 2, 3, and that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, this is super cool. And I think it was like the last week of the class, we got to spin up GW Basic.
Oh, wow. So these were PCs?
Yeah, they were on PCs. I don't remember what they were. But yeah, we spun up GW Basic and did some like simple Hello World kind of stuff. And I cruised through that, and that's when I caught the bug, was taking that class.
Oh, wow. And was that sort of the revelation that that's what you wanted to do, or was that the revelation that you wanted a computer, or?
It was the I learned from that I wanted to spend more time on a computer. And that was I think that was the second half of my sophomore year in high school. So then the first half of my junior year, I had signed up to take, computer programming 1, and it was GW Basic on a PC. And, I cruised through the entire 18 weeks of curriculum in like 3 weeks.
Wow.
And then I was going back to the teacher saying, okay, what should I do next? What should I do next? And they started assigning out the projects that the Computer 2 class was going to take, and then the Computer 3 class was going to take. And I got through all that stuff and still had some time to spare within that semester. And during that semester, so that was first quarter or first half of my junior year in high school, I sort of said right then, I'm like, this is what I want to do for a living. I want to write software that, in fact, I was even specific enough. I said, I want to write software to run other people's businesses.
Wow.
And so I knew that my junior year in high school. I was super lucky to find that out so early.
And was that formative? Did you end up trying to do it outside of class as well?
Yeah, I started nagging my mom to help me find a computer in some way, shape, or form. And it turned out she was a real estate office manager.
Oh, nice.
And her office was ready to buy some new computers. So she got to bring her old decommissioned PC home. It was an IBM PS2 8086 with a 20 meg hard card.
Wow.
And it had 2 floppy drives. That was awesome. So she brought that home, and I was able to start working on some stuff there.
And was this all GW Basic? Yeah,
all GW Basic at that point. And I started, I had seen some, I don't even know where I saw it, but those fancy screensavers. Do you remember what all those fancy screensavers were that were out in like the early Windows days?
The Flying Toast and the... Yeah.
I forget what those things were called.
Berkeley Labs or something. It was one of the colleges that had put it out. The one with the flying toasters, at least. I mean, they actually sold them. They did. For like $20, you could get these things to save your screen.
And I loved that idea. But I didn't have Windows. All I had was DOS, right? So I started trying to use GW Basic to write screensavers for DOS. Like, I don't even know what that looks like anymore.
Yeah.
And it was super primitive graphics, but that's what I started doing like every night. Was working on my screensavers. I ended up building up a collection of like 25 screensavers, but then of course I just could not find a way to invoke them from DOS, right?
No.
So then that led me into, and at that point at school, they were starting to teach me some C stuff.
Oh, nice.
So I learned the concept of terminate and stay resident. Old
TSRs.
TSRs, yeah. So I started writing some TSR code in C that could then execute my screensaver. So you could run my screensavers from DOS, and then if you sat idle long enough in DOS, it would actually pop up my screensavers.
Oh, wow. And were you invoking the GW Basic to do the animation, or did you have to rewrite it in C?
I was rewriting it at that point.
Wow.
And I was irritated by that.
The first of many language shifts where you had to end up, bringing in all this stuff you knew into another language.
Yeah. Yeah, I was lucky though. There was another student in my school that was actually there were 2 other guys in my high school that were really into programming, and one of them knew C pretty well, and he's the guy who taught me the TSR stuff.
Nice.
And then the other guy ran our town's BBS. I remember how awesome it was that he was working side jobs to earn enough money to pay for his house to have a second landline so he could have his dedicated BBS line.
Again, only one person could call in at a time.
Exactly. And I was dominating the thing. that's where I started sharing some code with people all around town. And there was actually, so this was in Cincinnati, Ohio. There were some people in like northern Kentucky that had caught wind of his BBS and were dialing in, and we were sharing some TSR code across his BBS.
Wow.
So I guess that was sort of kind of my first taste of open source.
Yeah, or in community at least.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I remember back in those days finding those, other people that knew this stuff, whether it was in your town or not. We used to do these parties, as much as you can have a party with a bunch of computers and a bunch of geeks, but a party nonetheless. There was Mountain Dew and a lot of floppy disks is all I remember.
Yeah, I went to one of those, and it was hosted by the guy that ran the BBS, and I'll be honest, it was kind of not my thing. A lot of the people that came were quite a bit older. So I was still, we were still in high school.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that came were in their like mid-20s, and it was a little scary. One guy came armed with nunchucks because he wasn't sure what he was walking into. Like, oh, wait a second, this might be dangerous, meeting a whole bunch of strangers online and getting together in person.
So my bad nunchuck skills might not come into play at all. Yeah.
But I was kind of lucky after that. I had gotten through all the courses that the high school had to offer. Got through the C stuff, and it was in the second half of my junior year. And they had changed my schedule up. They changed my schedule to say computer independent study.
Oh, nice.
And they just let me come into the computer lab by myself and do whatever I wanted.
Nice.
And I didn't have any deliverables, no deadlines, no anything. It was just come spend time on the computer and do your thing.
And so that prepares you for life at Microsoft. Oh, wait. No, that's not right. I think I have that backwards. Go on.
And I was, these PCs, I think there were 386s at the time that were in the lab. And I still had that 8086 at home. So I was doing what I could, but I still had never had my hands on Windows at this point.
Sure.
And this would have been like 1994, 1995. So we were a little behind on that. And our school was actually looking to try to get some funds for getting new PCs and getting things with Windows on them and stuff like that. So actually, as part of that independent study time, the principal, his name is Mr. Quatman, he came in one day and said, "Hey, we're starting up like a committee from the Parent Teachers Association on trying to submit a grant application to get some more money to build out new computer labs and get new computers with have them actually on a network together. Are you interested in helping?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" I said, "I don't know anything about networking, but I can at least give you the perspective of what it would be nice to have as a student here." So I started, my mom was driving me back to school at like 7:00 at night. And I was going to these committee meetings and got to contribute to putting together that grant proposal. And the school eventually got it, which was awesome. So I got a whole computer lab with everything networked together and all new Windows PCs. It was all friendly built after I had graduated. But it was that was neat to be involved in that. There were 38 adults and then me as a 82-pound 17-year-old.
That's funny. That's an interesting picture.
Yeah. It was actually just a fun story on the side. I was on the wrestling team in high school, but I was so small and so underweight they didn't have a weight class that I could even wrestle in. So. But that's all right.
Funny. Well, then you won all your matches unopposed.
I did.
Wow.
But what came out of that experience with that principal, just another piece of luck, was there's a pretty big software company in town, and this is in Milford, Ohio, sort of a no-name suburb of Cincinnati. And there's a company that at the time was called Structural Dynamics Research Corporation, or SDRC. Mm-hmm. They did computer-aided design, engineer, analysis, simulation kind of stuff. That Ford and NASA were some of their big customers.
Nice.
And lots of other government folks. But then any kind of industrial company could use their software to design and simulate their products inside the software. They had worked with the University of Cincinnati for a really long time on the co-op program.
Nice.
And they had a lot of co-op students coming in from college. And one year, it just happened to be that year, I think at this point I was like, it must have been the beginning of my senior year. They needed more bodies, essentially, and they had tapped out the co-op program. So they called up my principal, Mr. Quatman, and said, hey, do you happen to have any high school students that are good with computers? And from that experience of being involved in the committee for the grant, he said, yeah, actually, we've got this guy, Jeff, that he's just doing independent study. You want to talk to him? And over the course of just a couple of days, it went from that to me having a full-time job there.
Wow.
Still in high school. It was just total luck.
And was this what you did instead of going to college, or were you trying to do both, or had you planned to do both when you got out of high school?
Yeah, well, I was planning on going to the University of Cincinnati, in fact. Had gotten accepted. I don't know if I'd been accepted at that point yet, but I eventually ended up going on to their College of Engineering. So I had always anticipated I would go to UC they had a great computer engineering program at the time.
Nice.
Still did. So that had been my plan, but yeah, what the high school ended up working out for me was they completely rearranged my schedule for the rest of my senior year, where I came in and I think I took 4 classes and then I left and went to work.
Wow.
I was getting high school credit for working a job and I was getting paid.
Wow.
So that was really cool. And I started out on their test team, quality certification, and was testing their graphics support across the 200 different graphics cards they supported on all their different Unix machines. And very quickly found my job was very mundane and monotonous, and I wanted to automate it. So I did, right? So yeah, I was doing that in high school. But then the next fall came and I did end up starting at University of Cincinnati and took some time off work, so I could concentrate on that for a little while. But yeah, that didn't quite go as planned either.
None of it ever does. What did you find? What did you expect out of college, especially in a sort of CS environment, that maybe you didn't find in college? I mean, since it didn't go kind of the way you wanted.
I don't know what I was expecting, but I know what I wasn't expecting. And that was, after I got through the first 3 quarters of just weed out classes that the College of Engineering has, it was just physics and calculus and college level English and that kind of stuff. It was 21 credit hours a quarter of those classes. And I finally got to start taking programming classes. I remember a couple weeks in, the instructor was like, okay, this week we're going to learn the for loop. This week? Seriously, we're going to spend all week on the for loop? I was like, I got this, man. What's next? And that's really when I started getting frustrated.
I'm sure.
Then we got to go into our computer labs and use our Spark Station 10s to compile Hello World, get in line so that you could have your 1 hour long compilation on your Spark Station. And I actually got to where, working at SKRC, at one point I had experimental silicon graphics machines on my desk, right? That were so state of the art that I actually was driving from college back to work to compile my program, throw it back onto my floppy disk, and drive back to school faster than waiting in line for the lab.
Wow.
So that kind of led into that too. And it wasn't long before I decided just to quit school.
Because you were learning more at the job?
Very much so.
Oh, that's good.
it was the learning on the job was at the pace that was right for me, as opposed to a pace that was set for the class.
Sure. And were there people at the work that you considered sort of mentors, people that taught you what it meant to work in it instead of, mess with computers?
Yeah, it was an awesome environment. In fact, a couple of years ago, I forget if it was last year or year before, I went back to Cincinnati and dropped in at the SBRC office. And like 60% of the people that were in the group while I was working there are still there 20 years later.
Wow. I was surprised the company was still there, to be perfectly honest with you.
They've been bought a few times. Let's see, I'm trying to remember who owns them now. I don't even remember.
It doesn't matter. But
yeah, it doesn't matter. But yeah, they've been acquired a few times, but they still do some of the same kind of software. But even through a half a dozen acquisitions, the team's still intact.
Wow.
And I think that's, so many times I've just been lucky and fortunate for me to have been able to get mentored by a group of people that were such a family that they've worked together for 20 years. Several people there really took me under their wings and coached me. And I learned so much while I was there.
And how long were you there total? From high school through?
It was almost 4 years, I guess, while I was there. And what led me to leave was actually one of the full-time employees there. Her daughter and her soon-to-be son-in-law were starting a .com startup, and it was going to be a classic ASP, SQL Server VB component application. And I had been doing some web stuff at that point, and from Perl CGI, and she got me in contact with them and said, "Hey, you ought to talk to this Jeff guy. He's been doing some web stuff here at work. He's the only guy in the company doing web stuff. I know you guys are doing this .com startup thing. Maybe it'd be a good fit. Maybe it would be a good fit." So I started working there as a second job at first. And then when the company started doing well enough that I was able to, I quit SDRC and went to that other company.
And that has to be a different environment, the 4-person versus the 400-person company.
Yeah, very much so. In SDRC, I think we had several hundred developers, and then a big field team. And yeah, we had one field person essentially at the .com startup. It was the project we did was real estate agent client tracking services, I think is what it was. And we were so far ahead of the curve. We were taking the entire workflow around what real estate agents do for managing offers and counter offers and all their contracts. And we moved it all out to the web. And it could actually integrate with MLS, did some pretty cool things. But in like 2000, nobody was ready to use the web for anything with their business. But yeah, so we had one lady, the daughter of the lady I'd previously worked with was a real estate agent, and she wanted the software. She had gotten her license, and she was like, "Oh my goodness, my job is horrible. It's 100% administration." Yeah. So she asked her fiance, she's, "You're good with computers. Can't you build this?" That was the birth of the company. So yeah, then it was, as you said, it was 4 of us. And then we ended up, we got a designer that joined us, and we had a PM that joined us, and it kind of became semi-legit. And it was super fast paced. It was, in the guy's basement at night. And then we started working from home. As soon as the company could afford getting a VPN was when we started working from home. Wow. Totally different experience. And learning a completely different way. At that point, I didn't really have a mentor. Right. So I was having to learn on my own a lot more. So totally different experience, learn different things in different ways, but extremely valuable. And were you finding the online community was mature enough yet then? It was getting there. But I remember spending an awful lot that was when I really started writing a lot of JavaScript code. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like that was still kind of black magic. And there really wasn't any support out there. No. So a lot of it was just trial and error.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And did you ever have a CompuServe account to try to find other people?
I never did.
Oh, wow.
It's funny. At that point, I know that my mom had one for her work, and she was trying to tell me I should get one, but I never did have a CompuServe account.
That was kind of that was before, that was the glue for me between BBSs and when the web actually worked for developer community. And so what sort of drove you from there? Did you just grow out of that business, or did, as everything happened in 2000, 2001, was it part of the bubble?
A little bit. That project that we had done as a startup, it never took off because, like I said, it was ahead of its time. And it was, as we went around and talked to agents, like, oh yeah, this is super awesome. That would save me so many hours. But their brokers had to be on board with it.
Yeah.
And despite having support from agents, we just couldn't get support from any brokers. So we never had any dollars come in. But the company kind of morphed from being its own little .com startup to being a consulting company, because at that point we had built a legitimate .com kind of site, and it was pretty well done for the time. And with that, the owner of the company went and he found some business. I think he might have actually been going to look for a job himself.
Sure.
But he spun it. Instead of selling himself, he sold his company's services. So we actually picked up a contract to build out a system that at the end of the day ended up powering a lot of big mortgage companies. We automated the mortgage process that a lot of companies were using. And that became kind of a big deal. And that was a couple of years of time. And that was where I got my first taste of like truly having enterprise level code in production, was on that project.
Yeah. Cause one data mistake in a mortgage process and, talking about it's a high dollar mistake. Yeah.
I actually had a mistake I cast upon myself. Was one of the parts of the mortgage process is credit reports. And one of the first sort of features I did on that project was automating the process of taking a mortgage application online. And the very first step is to go talk to the credit bureau backends and pull credit reports, and then run that against the rules that the mortgage company has set up for whether or not the credit's good enough. Well, the first time I got the web front end and sort of my own mid-tier connected to the credit bureau backends, I was like, well, cool, I think it's connected. How do I test it? Here's my social security number. So I ran my own credit report like 200 times for mortgage inquiries and destroyed my own credit without realizing I didn't know how credit scores worked.
No.
I was 20 something year, like early 20s, like 20 or 21 years old. I didn't know how that stuff worked. A couple months later, I went to buy a car. And I had some money in the bank, and I had a good job, and I went to go buy a Mitsubishi Eclipse. I was so excited. And the salesman comes back. He's like, yeah, there's a problem. You've got a credit score of 450, which is the lowest possible score. I'm like, what? How is that possible? And he said, well, it looks like you've been having tons of inquiries that are just killing your score. And I understood at that point. I said, well, that's because I'm writing this system that automates the mortgage backend for banks, and it integrates with the credit bureaus. And he's looking at me. I'm at this point maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, right?
Yeah.
And he looks at me like, yeah, right, kid. Seriously, I am. So I had to leave without the car.
Oh, that's a sad day. That's a sad day. There was I was testing a beeper automation piece of software I wrote very early in my career, and I accidentally sent 4,000 pages to everybody at Chevron all in one day across the country.
Oh,
everyone got
funny.
beeped. Whoops. Sorry.
The lessons we learn the hard way. I will say that is something that has been true for me in software, probably even more so than anything else, is I learned from my mistakes. whether it be just how to tackle code, how to architect things. I don't learn from when I get it right. I learn from when I get it wrong.
I have this sense out in the sort of the community these days that there's a fear amongst a lot of developers of doing it wrong. And so they end up being frozen trying to find the right solution. And they go out online and ask a bunch of very, verbose questions trying to get how am I supposed to architect this correctly? And, when you would make those mistakes, were you sort of afraid to make them at the time, or did you just think that was part of the development process?
That it changes for me over time. I've definitely had periods where I wanted to get it right first try. I was really anxious about getting it wrong because I wasn't sure I was going to have the time to course correct if I got it wrong.
Yeah.
But on projects where the timing isn't as much of a concern and getting it right is more of the focus, I just try and try and try again. I was just talking with a coworker the other day about trying a different approach to something. He said, but we've already committed to this other design. He said, Art, do you try out different approaches? And I said, have you looked at my commit history? Like, seriously, it took me 32 commits to get that tiny little feature working because I tried it 18 different ways. And that's one of the things I love about the job I have right now is that we're given a lot of time to learn how to do things the right way. And we're using Node and React. And one of the ways I started on Node is I actually went and watched your Pluralsight course on Node.js for the .NET developer. I'm like, what is Node?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and that course helped a lot. And what I loved about that and some of the other stuff I see out there is learning one concept at a time is so important. And in the Node space, it seems like there are so many different ways to do things. There are umpteen million NPM modules out there. How do you choose gulp or do you choose grunt? And oh no, we're going to make this decision and we'll be stuck with it for the rest of our lives. It's so daunting.
Yes.
You have to just try one and use it. And if you factor stuff right to minimize the number of dependencies you take on those aspects, expect that you're going to change your mind later. I found that's been a good mindset for me in this new world.
And did you find that, especially working on web projects where you could redeploy more easily than desktop projects, for instance, that you were able to do those sort of tests and experiments more?
Yeah, sometimes a little bit too aggressively. But yeah, very much. There's something magical about being able to, especially in the day and age we're in now, of git push origin master queues up a deployment and it's out there on servers 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
Once you've got that tool on your belt, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's move fast and furious, and take a line from Facebook, break things.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you being on the show. And there's actually a lot of parallels with between you and I that I didn't know before the show. We both got hired out of high school and decided that we were learning more at work than at college, and I'm not sure that either of us are confident that was the right decision, but it's worked out for both of us so far.
Yeah, I miss the fact that I never got to take a compiler class.
Yeah.
There's some of those things that I know would have been really helpful, would have been nice little things to have, but yeah, it's always in the back of my mind, but I feel like I'm doing all right.
I think you're doing fine. That's funny. Well, thanks for being on the show, and enjoy the next meeting I'm sure you're going to have on campus soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sean. I really appreciate it.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Hello World podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World podcast